The wind came first, a low moan over the desolate prairie, carrying the scent of coming snow and a loneliness that felt colder than any ice. Elara huddled deeper into the threadbare blanket, the cabin's single window a gray rectangle against the encroaching dusk. Outside, the world was vast, unforgiving white and brown. Inside, it was little better. The fire in the hearth dwindled, the last few logs crackling a mournful tune. Hunger was a dull ache in her belly, but the deeper emptiness was the one that gnawed at her soul. He was gone. Not dead. She knew, just gone. Vanished like smoke, taking the last fragile remnants of her hope and leaving behind only the wreckage of a broken heart and a spirit clipped so close it could no longer recall the shape of flight. She had been adrift since, a derelict vessel on a sea of despair. The few neighbors were distant, their faces shuddered, their judgment a palpable weight she could not escape. A woman alone was either a curiosity or a target. A woman like her, with a past whispered about in hushed tones, was simply a burden best ignored, or worse, exploited. The cold wasn't just outside. It had seeped into her bones, into the very core of her being. Survival felt less like a fight and more like a slow, inevitable surrender. Every gust of wind against the thin walls was a reminder of her isolation. Every shadow a potential threat. Fear was a constant companion, a knot in her stomach that never loosened. She closed her eyes, trying to conjure a time before the weight, before the silence, before the utter, crushing solitude. But the memories were like faded photographs, the edges blurred by sorrow. The cabin groaned, settling against the rising wind, and Elara knew the storm was nearly upon her. She had little food, less fuel, and no strength left to face it. Felt like the end, the final, quiet vanishing of a life already fading. Then, a sound cut through the wind's lament. Not the familiar creak of the cabin, or the howl of an animal, but the distinct crunch of boots on frozen ground. Elara's heart leaped into her throat, a sudden, terrifying acceleration. She froze, listening, every nerve ending screaming caution. The sound stopped, silence save for the wind. Had she imagined it? Her hands trembled as she reached for the heavy poker beside the hearth, the only weapon she possessed. A shadow fell across the window, momentarily blocking the gray light. It lingered. A figure stood outside, indistinct in the gloom. Elara's breath hitched. Who could be out here? No one decent traveled in weather like this to a place like this. A moment later, a heavy, deliberate knock sounded at the door. It wasn't demanding, but it wasn't hesitant either. Just there. Insistent. She didn't move. Could she pretend not to be home? But the smoke curling thinly from the chimney would betray her. The knocking came again, slightly louder. Her mind raced, cataloging threats. Loners, outlaws, desperate men driven by the elements. The thought sent a fresh wave of fear through her. She swallowed, the sound loud in her ears. Her grip on the poker tightened, knuckles white. The man outside waited. The wind howled, a vast, empty sound swallowing the world beyond her fragile walls. Slowly, cautiously, her heart pounding like a drum against her ribs, Elara pushed herself to her feet. The silence from the other side of the door stretched, taut and unnerving, until she felt she might snap. She had to know. She had to face it, whatever it was. She moved to the door, the wooden floorboards creaking softly under her weight. Her eyes were fixed on the sturdy oak planks separating her from the unknown. Her hand hovered near the latch, uncertain. What if it was worse than the storm? What if it was one of them, come to torment her further? The silence outside grew heavier, more patient. It felt like an eternity stood between the two knocks. Her hand finally settled on the cold metal latch. With a surge of desperate courage, fueled by the sheer impossibility of her situation, she drew a shaky breath and pulled the latch. The door swung inward a fraction, revealing a man silhouetted against the swirling snow. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in layers of rough wool and hides. Snowflakes clung to his dark beard and the brim of his hat. His face was obscured by shadow and weather, but his presence felt substantial. Dangerous, perhaps, but also strangely still. He didn't speak immediately, just stood there, the wind whipping around him, pushing tendrils of snow into the cabin. Alara peered up at him, trying to discern something, anything, in the dim light. His eyes, when he finally tilted his head slightly, were dark, unreadable pools. There was no aggression in them, but no warmth either. Just a quiet, assessing gaze that seemed to look right through the layers of her fear and desperation. He looked like a man who had seen things that had carved lines into his face and silence into his soul. He was an outsider, that much was clear. His clothes were rough, his manner solitary. The air around him held the tang of wood smoke and distance. The wind tugged at the door, threatening to rip it from her grasp. "Ma'am," he finally said. His voice low and gravelly, barely audible above the wind's roar. It was a simple word, devoid of threat, but also devoid of anything welcoming. It was simply an acknowledgement of her presence. Got caught out. Need shelter. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of necessity. Alara hesitated, torn between abject terror and the desperate, irrational hope that this unexpected intrusion might be something else. Something that wasn't just another blow. She looked at the storm gathering intensity outside, felt the chill deep within the cabin, and knew she was ill-equipped to survive alone. And she looked at the man, standing there in the swirling snow, weathered and self-possessed. There was a quiet competence about him, even in his simple request. He didn't plead or threaten. He stated his need. Her rational mind screamed danger, warned her against trusting this stranger. This man who appeared out of nowhere in the teeth of a blizzard. But the deeper, more primal part of her, the part that had been starved of any human presence that wasn't tainted by judgment or abandonment, felt a flicker of something else. Not hope, not yet. Perhaps just a different kind of desperation. A desperation for another heartbeat in the suffocating silence. She made her decision. A quiet, weary resignation settling over her. She pulled the door wider, stepping back. "Come in," she murmured, her voice thin and raspy from disuse. "Before the storm buries us both." He stepped inside, bringing with him the biting cold and the scent of pine and the wild outside. He closed the door firmly behind him, shutting out the immediate fury of the wind, plunging the small cabin into deeper shadow. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. The understanding passed between them without words. He was here because the storm demanded it, and she had let him in because her solitude demanded it. He removed his hat, shaking snow onto the floor, revealing a shock of dark, unruly hair. His gaze swept over the cabin, taking in its sparse furnishings, the meager fire, the woman standing before him, small and fragile in the gloom. He didn't comment. He simply was. He moved towards the hearth without asking, dropping his pack and kneeling to warm his hands. Alara watched him, still clutching the poker, her heart rate slowly beginning to settle, replaced by a cautious vigilance. He was here. She was no longer alone. The weight in the silence had shifted, from utter emptiness to a tense, uncertain shared space. The storm raged outside, but the true storm, for now, was contained within the small cabin, between two strangers brought together by necessity and the unforgiving vastness of the prairie winter. He stayed, not out of politeness, but out of quiet necessity. The storm raged for 3 days, burying the cabin in snowdrifts, trapping them together in the confines of its walls. He didn't intrude. He didn't ask questions. He simply existed alongside her, a silent, constant presence. He tended the fire efficiently, using the last of her wood sparingly and then finding more, somehow, from a buried cache she hadn't known existed behind the cabin. He melted snow for water. He shared the meager dried meat and hardtack he carried in his pack, dividing it without comment. He mended a loose shutter the wind threatened to rip away, his large hands surprisingly deft. He didn't talk unless it was necessary, about the weather, about the dwindling supplies, about the work that needed doing. His name, he said once, was Elias. Nothing more. No explanation of where he came from or where he was going. and Alara didn't ask. She had no right, and curiosity felt like a betrayal of the protective shell she had built around her broken heart. She watched him from a distance, across the small cabin, from the corner of her eye. She observed the way he moved, quiet and deliberate, the way his gaze was steady and observant, missing nothing. There was a stillness about him, a profound self-containment that resonated with a part of her that craved stability, even in another person's solitude. He didn't try to comfort her, didn't offer platitudes or pity. For that, she was profoundly grateful. She was weary of both. He treated her with a quiet respect, acknowledging her presence without demanding anything from her. He didn't look at her with the veiled contempt or pity she was accustomed to. His dark eyes were simply watchful. As the storm began to abate, leaving behind a world of blinding white and silence, a tentative shift occurred within the cabin. Necessity had forced them together, but a fragile, unspoken understanding began to bloom in the quiet space between them. Alara found herself less afraid, not just of the storm, but of being alone. His presence, though silent, was a bulwark against the vast, terrifying emptiness she had been drowning in. She started to do small tasks again, sweeping the hearth, tidying their shared space, tasks that had felt insurmountable before he arrived. He didn't praise her, but his quiet acknowledgement of her efforts was a subtle validation she hadn't realized she craved. He was like the landscape outside, harsh and unyielding in its reality, but capable of moments of stark, quiet beauty. One afternoon, when the sun finally broke through the clouds, casting a dazzling, blinding light on the snow-covered prairie, Alara sat by the window, watching the world outside. Elias was outside, clearing snow from the door. Her internal monologue, for the first time in months, wasn't solely focused on despair. It was observing, assessing, tentatively reaching out towards something external. She saw the sheer physical effort he was exerting, the steady rhythm of his shovel. She saw the strength in his arms, the determination in his posture. It was a reflection of a different kind of resilience than she had known. Hers had been a passive, enduring strength, like stone eroded by water. His was an active, shaping strength like the wind cutting through drifts. She realized, with a start, that she hadn't thought about her past, or him, or the judgment of others, for an entire hour. His quiet presence had somehow created a space within her where those ghosts held less sway. He came back inside, shaking the snow from his coat, his cheeks ruddy with cold. He looked at her, sitting by the window, and for a moment, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, recognition, understanding. It was gone as quickly as it appeared. He nodded towards the hearth. Fire needs feeding. His words were simple, practical. But they were also an invitation to shared purpose, to the simple, grounding rhythm of keeping warm and staying alive. Alara pushed herself up, feeling a stiffness in her joints but also a spark of something else, a nascent determination. The broken heart was still broken, the clipped spirit still earthbound, but the desperate emptiness had lessened. It had been replaced by a quiet, shared vigilance, a partnership of necessity forged in the crucible of the prairie winter. They were two damaged souls, finding a strange, quiet solace in each other's silent company, a tacit agreement to face the world outside, together. The wind still howled sometimes, but it no longer felt quite so lonely. Weeks bled into months. The snow melted, reluctantly at first, then rushing in torrents down the thawing earth. The prairie began to stir, pushing hesitant green shoots through the mud. Elias stayed. There was no discussion, no formal agreement. He simply remained, a part of the landscape of her life, as quiet and constant as the distant horizon. He helped her repair the fences that had fallen during the winter, his strength and skill transforming daunting tasks into manageable ones. He hunted, bringing back rabbits and prairie chickens, adding protein to her meager diet. He worked from dawn till dusk, his movements economical and purposeful. And in the evenings, they would sit by the fire, the silence between them no longer tense, but comfortable. A silence filled with the soft crackle of burning wood, the gentle sifting of embers, the shared exhaustion at the end of a day of hard work. Alara found her own strength returning, not just physical but something deeper. The constant knot of fear loosened its grip. She worked alongside him when she could, planting a small garden, mending clothes, cleaning the cabin. The simple act of caring for her surroundings, of investing effort into her own small piece of the world, was a form of healing. Elias never offered unsolicited advice or criticism. He let her work at her own pace, in her own way, occasionally offering a quiet suggestion or a helping hand when she struggled. He saw her, not as the woman whispered about in the few scattered homesteads nearby, not as the one who had been left behind, but simply as Alara, the woman who lived in this cabin, who faced the harshness of the prairie with a quiet, stubborn resilience. His acceptance, unspoken and unasked for, was a balm to her wounded spirit. Her internal monologue had changed. It was less haunted by the past, more focused on the present. The weather, the garden, the tasks at hand, the man who shared her space. She found herself observing him not with suspicion, but with a growing, quiet regard. She noticed the kindness in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking, directed perhaps at a stray animal or the fragile new growth in the garden. She noticed the weariness etched around his eyes, suggesting his own untold story of hardship. She wondered about him, but the curiosity was gentle, not demanding. She respected his silence, just as he respected hers. The broken heart still carried its scars, but the sharp edges had softened, smoothed by the quiet companionship. The clipped spirit felt the stirrings of something like hope, a tentative possibility of future days that weren't just about enduring, but about living. Then the outside world intruded. A rider appeared one afternoon, a man from a nearby settlement, his face tight with a mean sort of curiosity. He had heard Elias was staying with her. His questions were thinly veiled accusations, probing, suggestive. He spoke of her past, his tone dripping with judgment. Alara felt the old fear rising, the familiar weight of societal condemnation pressing down on her. But before she could shrink back into herself, Elias was there. He stepped out of the cabin, placing himself between her and the rider. He didn't say a word. His presence alone was enough. His dark eyes met the rider's, steady and unwavering. There was a quiet, formidable strength in his stance, a silent promise of protection that radiated from him. The rider shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. He muttered something about minds being put at ease and wheeled his horse around, riding away without another word. Alara stood there, trembling slightly, watching the man ride off. She turned to Elias, searching his face. He simply looked back at her, his expression unreadable, but the silent promise of protection remained. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. He didn't dismiss her gratitude, but he didn't dwell on it either. It was simply understood. In that moment, standing together against the outside judgment, something shifted irreversibly between them. The bond forged in silence and shared necessity had deepened into something akin to partnership, a quiet alliance of two outsiders against a world that sought to judge and diminish them. The broken heart didn't miraculously heal, but it found a sturdy hand to hold in the darkness. The clipped spirit didn't suddenly fly, but it felt the ground beneath its feet was firm, supported by a quiet, steadfast strength not entirely its own, but now shared. The seasons turned, bringing the relentless heat of summer, then the gold and russet hues of autumn, and finally, the first sharp bite of approaching winter. Elias remained. Their life together had settled into a rhythm, a quiet domesticity built on work, silence, and a deepening, unspoken connection. The cabin, once a place of despair for Alara, now felt like home, a sanctuary they had built together, board by board, silence by silence. The broken heart had found a quiet mending, not through forgetting the past, but by building a present that held more kindness, more safety, more presence. The clipped spirit had not sprouted magnificent wings, but it had learned to navigate the currents of life, to find moments of quiet joy in the simple things, the warmth of the fire, the taste of fresh bread, the shared glance across the table. Their bond was not built on grand declarations or passionate words. It was forged in the shared reality of survival, in the unspoken understanding of past hurts, in the quiet dignity of two souls finding solace in mutual acceptance. Elias had not saved her in the way a hero saves a damsel. He had simply walked beside her, offering a steadfast presence that allowed her to find the strength within herself. He had been the sturdy tree against which her storm-battered vessel could anchor, and perhaps she had offered him something in return, a quiet harbor for his own solitary journey, a place where his silence was not a burden but a language understood. One crisp autumn evening, sitting by the fire, the first snow of the season falling gently outside, Elias spoke. His voice was low, rumbling softly in the quiet cabin. This land, it's hard. He paused, his gaze fixed on the flames. Alara waited, her heart beating softly in her chest. But it's honest. He looked at her then, his dark eyes holding a depth she had come to understand. Like you, it was the closest he had ever come to a compliment, a confession, a glimpse into the quiet regard he held for her. Alara felt a warmth spread through her, deeper than the fire. She didn't need grand words. His quiet acknowledgement was everything. Life on the prairie remained challenging. There were still storms, still uncertainties, still the occasional shadow of the outside world's judgment. But they faced it together. Alara, the woman with the broken heart and the clipped spirit, stood taller now. The vulnerability was still there, a part of who she was, but it was tempered by a newfound strength, a quiet resilience born of hardship and human connection. She had learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past, but about building a future strong enough to hold it. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, looking out at the vast, star-filled prairie sky, she felt a sense of peace she had never thought possible. Her spirit might never soar effortlessly, but it was no longer bound to the ground. It was rooted, yes, deeply rooted in this harsh, beautiful land and in the quiet companionship she had found. Rooted and strong enough to face whatever the winds might bring. Together, they were two souls, weathered and scarred, but no longer alone, finding dignity and a quiet hope in the vast, silent heart of the prairie. The journey had been long, marked by sorrow and isolation, but it had led them here, to this quiet understanding, this earned peace.